and everybody's quiet, and that's usually the universal signal that I am standing on a sore nerve. And most preachers, when they're standing somewhere where they feel like it's being effective, they just kind of tarry there. You know what I'm saying? But now, if you're with me, if y'all want to get out of here tonight in a passion, and let me hear you. Can y'all make some noise? All right, here we go. I don't know if that's just saying that y'all can make noise or you want to get out of here early. I don't know which one it is. We'll take it for the first. Well, find your place with in Revelation chapter number 2. You know that my assignment, Tim asked if I would come over and preach a series through these 7 churches that we are introduced to in the book of Revelation. And we began that last week church at Ephesus, and tonight we find ourselves in chapter 2, verses 8 through 11. We last week the significance of any given church in the kingdom of God is found and is directly proportionate to her present orientation, the Christ. He is the head of the church. He is our king. He is our master. He is our commander. He is the one whom we serve. We ultimately do everything that we do for an audience, and it is for Him and for His good pleasure. And if we are not doing that, if we are not pleasing Him, then it really doesn't matter who we are pleasing. See, it's not significant if we please ourselves, or we please one another, or we please the world. If we're not pleasing our Master, then we have totally missed the mark. And our value, our ability to make a contribution of eternal significance of His kingdom on earth is directly related to the effect that we are having upon the Lord. I mean, the Bible tells us in several places that it's possible to grieve Him. It is possible to please Him. And last week, down at Ephesus, we concluded that the church at Ephesus was a church that made the Lord sad. Do you understand? There's very little, I hate to use the word chance. So let's try to come up with a better word. There's little opportunity for a church that is making the Lord sad to have anything of eternal value happen within that church, and it's also very improbable that that church will do anything for the Lord that has any significance or kingdom, because job number 1 has been abandoned. And rather than pleasing Him, we have made Him sad. We saw that the church of Ephesus made the Lord sad because they had left Him as their first love. Tonight I want us to look at church number 2 in this series of 7. So long as I read the message that to the Apostle John and ask him to send maybe even the pastor of that church as it comes through apocalyptic, and that apocalyptic language is written with the purpose of concealing its message from the uninitiated. That is not Christ and not the God living within them. The natural man receives not of God, for they are spiritually discerned. But this apocalyptic language burst with meaning for those who are the initiated, those who are the people of God, those who have been born again. So most language throughout this apocalyptic book is not to be understood literally, but maybe metaphorically and symbolically. Oh, the message is literal. Sometimes the words are metaphoric. So let's look at what it is that Jesus had to say to the church down in Smyrna. Verse number 8 of Revelation chapter 2, God's Word says, "And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the first and the last, who was dead and has come to life, says this." Now, can I stop right there? This isn't a part of my message, but I just can't get past this Christology, okay? Because part of the grandeur of Revelation is seeing Christ. We said last week that the key to understanding it is not eschatology, but Christology. That is, seeing Christ. And this book is filled with scenes of worship. And the reason is because it reveals, unveils for us the glorified risen Lord. So let's stop right here. Notice how he identifies himself. He identifies himself as the first and the last. He's quite fond of saying things like this, saying, "I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and the end. I am the first and the last." And what is he telling us? He's telling us that there is nothing outside of him that his people need in order to flourish spiritually in the world for his glory. Not one thing do we need that's outside of Christ. He is abundantly sufficient for every need that you have, and for every need that I have, and for every need that anybody could possibly have. He is sufficient. There's nothing outside of him. He's the first, he's the last. He bookends everything within the content of his person. So can I ask you a question? You may want to write this. I've seen this formula before, and it goes like this. Jesus plus what equals enough? And if there ain't at all that we put in the blank, then see, we've set ourselves up for great failure. Can I be honest with you? There's something in that blank. Something that I think I need, something I think I deserve, something I think I ought to have, that is really outside of the sufficiency. Great failure, great disappointment. Notice what he says. The first and the last, who was dead, come to life. He didn't swoon. He didn't just pout. He died. But here's the good news. Death had no grip. Death couldn't hold. And he is alive and alive forevermore. And the New Testament tells us, just as he conquered death, so shall you and I. And you know, I had to remind myself quite often, if the worst thing that can happen to me on any given day is that my heart suddenly explode within my chest, and the very next nanosecond I find myself in the rarefied air of heaven's glory in his presence, my goodness, there ain't a whole lot bad that can happen to me, huh? If that's the worst thing that can happen to me. Here's reality. You've got eternity with the one who was dead come to life in front of you. Paul tells us to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Hey, it really just begins when you close your eyes in death. Did you know that? My goodness, everything that we've just been able to see through the eye of faith, we can now see in person. Faith becomes sight. And the descriptions that we have had all our life pale in comparison to the reality of what waits ahead of you and I. Because of his victory. Because of what he has done. Brothers and sisters, we get a good dose of that in our soul to be able to live with a little bit of reckless abandon, you know what I'm saying? And stop trying to hold on to this world like it's all that there is and everything we've got. Because, boy, I'm telling you, it's not. We ought to be able to live on the edge by faith because of what we know. I heard the story one time of a man whose family decided to get a house cat. And he wasn't a fan of house cats at all. He made it known that he wasn't happy. They got the cat. He wasn't happy with the cat, but loved that cat. And one day they were going to the mall. He went out, cranked the car driveway over the cat. How in the world am I going to tell my wife and daughters that this was an accident? Because they know I hate this cat. So he had an idea. He said, I'm just not going to tell them. So he scooped the cat carcass up, deposited it somewhere where it would never be found. And they came home and looking for the cat. He said, well, I don't know. It was just here a little while ago. Days went by, the cat, and they were sad. He said, tell you what we'll do. I'll make signs and put them through the neighborhood. I'll take out an ad in the classifieds. We'll put a picture of the cat in the paper, and I'll say, reward $1,000 for this cat. His neighbor saw him putting up a sign for a reward for that cat. He said, man, what is wrong with you? I know how you felt about that cat, and now you're ready. You're willing to pay $1,000 for the return of that cat ain't coming home. And you know what? We know you can afford to live life. I hate to even say it this way. Abandon to the lordship of Jesus Christ. Because make no mistake about it, stepping out on His Word is not stepping out on nothing and finding there. Stepping out on His Word is stepping out on the surest foundation you'll ever put your foot on in your life. Sometimes you think, my goodness, is it really going to happen? Is it really going to work? And boy, I'm telling you here, tonight it does. Notice when we get back to the text, you see all that was free. I ain't even started preaching yet. I don't even have y'all on the clock yet. Okay, go ahead and start the clock, Tanya. Now we can start charging. Here we go. Notice verse 9. It's what Jesus says. I know your tribulations and your poverty, but you are rich. And the blasphemy by those who say not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Hear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about some of you into prison, so that you will be tested, and you will have tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes will not be hurt by the second death. You know, one of my pet peeves as a consumer is I just expect a product that I buy that has some type of qualitative guarantee up to its promise. I mean, if I buy something and I pay a little extra more for it because it's supposed to be a quality product and it promises to do this, this, and this, and it does not do this or that when I get it home, I'm pretty mad at that. And I really want to take the thing back, and most of the time do. And anytime I have a bad experience with something that's supposed to be a quality product, doesn't reflect real good on the manufacturer. And I'm normally done with that manufacturer. You see, there are some products today that I won't buy. They just did not live up to their qualitative, did not perform as they claim that they will perform. So I just X them off of my list. Now, if it's like with an earthly product, and if an earthly, worldly, physical product reflects poorly upon the maker and upon the manufacturer, if it doesn't live up to its claim, how much more is that true of a divine product, the Church of Jesus Christ, when she doesn't live up to what the manufacturer, the maker, says that she ought to do? You see, God has created a church that ought to be composed of folk that just don't have any quit in them. Folk who have a bulldog mentality and who will not let go come hell or high water. No matter what's in front of us, we don't have no backup in us, and we don't have no give up in us, because we come like that. When you're born again, God just puts something in you, puts grit in your spirit, and you want to keep going and not give up. You see, the Bible makes some pretty outrageous claims about the people of God. And boy, bring those claims to reality. Here's what Jesus said. He said, "For upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against her." Man, could I see a church rise up today that lives up to the manufacturer's claim? Because I hate to tell you, but most churches that I know of are not filled with spiritual he-men and bulldogs, but most of them are filled with a bunch of spiritual weenies who give up the first sight of trouble. I mean, I don't understand why it is that most of the time we're not men of faith, but we sometimes think we're mice. Now, if you think I'm being a little bit harsh and going overboard, I'm not. Because I want to tell you, rather than standing and the gate not prevailing against us, too many of us, because we didn't like what went down at the church. Somebody heard our go the way I want. And can I say to you, a church does not reflect very well on the man. And no wonder folk aren't giving us a second look when it's not the gates of hell that are conquering us, our own petty preferences and desires that we can't even be victorious over. Well, this church down in Smyrna was not a church like that. This church down at Smyrna was one of the two in this series that Jesus Christ has no chastisement for her. Nothing to say negative. He only gives this church commendation that comes directly from Him. This church down in Smyrna is a church that makes the Lord proud. Boy, I want to tell you, when you look at this church and you see what Jesus says, you can just kind of see the Lord standing up and saying, yes, those are my people. That's how I designed the church. That's what I intended her to be. This is what I intended her to do. This is how I intended her to respond to adversity. This is how I planned for her to work and to conduct herself in the midst of a lost world. And you can just kind of see Jesus being proud of His people. Man, I want to be a part of a church like that. It's kind of like it was when the Lord was talking to the devil about Job. Do you remember that? You remember when the Lord said, hey, have you seen my servant Job? I mean, can't you just see God pointing out to the devil, a man who was faithful, and just having a little bit of pride in the fact that this man was walking with him against every was just like that. Makes the Lord proud. Two things I want to point out from this passage tonight, because man, that's the type of church I want to be a part of. It's a church that makes the Lord fully want to identify with the church that makes Jesus somebody that He cannot be ashamed to. Notice what it is that the Bible says about this church. First thing that we notice about a church that makes the Lord proud is it is a church that is willing to pay the cost of persecution. Willing to pay the cost of persecution. Look what Jesus said. He said, I know your tribulation and your poverty, in verse 9, and the blasphemy that's coming your way. Down in Smyrna, for some reason or another, they were just in a hotbed. And we have more data on most of the others, and we know a good bit about it, and we know a good bit about the context in which she lived. Matter of fact, down there in Smyrna was one of John the Apostle's disciples. And this guy lived to be about 85 years old. He was well advanced in years. His name was Polycarp. And when Polycarp was sitting in his house, he was the bishop, the historical data tells us, down in Smyrna, probably the pastor of this very church about which we are reading. One day, Polycarp was sitting in his house and there was a knock on the door. He answered the door and it was the Roman authorities. And the Roman authorities said to him, "Sir Polycarp, we know there's nothing to be gained by us carrying out the orders of our superiors. But here's the orders. There are rules that you have in there from which guide these people that you call a church. If you will surrender and you will cease to speak in the